beep, 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 beep. Welcome once again to the court of the Edijester. How are we? The good news just keeps coming. Yes, we have more good news for you this morning, brought to us by the eminent Colin Wright, known as @SwipeRight on Twitter. You'll be familiar with this chap, I'm sure. Other than that, first of all, subscribe, buy me a coffee, the usual. All right, okay? If you can support me, or come and join my Substack. It's on offer at the moment, so there's a link downstairs for that. So I'm really pleased to see this, but it's also it's telling. That's a word, isn't it? Telling. It's very telling, the situation here. Very telling indeed. So let's take a look at what Colin has had to say. Well, Colin tweeted on the 25th of November, which has now had, his tweets had 2.4 million views. Gotta love that. You gotta love it, eh? So breaking, said Colin, the New York Times and Business and @Business, which is two very important reporting websites, you know, the medials, killed stories at the 11th hour covering new research on DEI pedagogy and its negative psychological impacts. Now, killed stories means they said, no, we're not running it. So there was an ideological bias for a start. And then they're talking about DEI pedagogy. Pedagogy. They talk about that in education all the time. I prefer the idea of andragogy, which is about adults. It actually goes farther than that. But pedagogy, DEI pedagogy and its negative psychological impacts. It's just educational waffle gab. The study showed that certain DEI practices increase hostility, authoritarian tendencies, and agreement with extreme rhetoric. Oh, there we go. What a surprise. The grievance merchants who bring you critical social justice have been making people hostile, increasing their authoritarian tendencies and making them agree with extreme rhetoric. So in other words, companies have been creating this problem, right? Universities, schools, everybody that is doing any of this EDI, DEI nonsense is causing the problem. Can you say crumbling edifice? As we get older, we're all aware of our crumbling edifice. Now, stop it. This is serious. It's good news. It is good news. No, let's continue. Right, so the study was conducted by an organisation called the Network Contagion Research Institute, which is NCRI, in collaboration with Rutgers University. It investigated the psychological effects of DEI pedagogy, specifically trainings. I love it. They call that in America, trainings. Over here, you doing your training? Yeah, I am. Have you had any trainings? It is in America. That's great. That draw heavily from, we shouldn't be using either, by the way. The days of training people are over. Who puts, screw one in hole two unless they know what they're doing? Nobody. We don't do training anymore. Business is going to have to get its head around this. They're going to have to educate people because the schools and universities have let you down. They're not happy about that. They don't like that word education. It's because most businesses are started by people that A, didn't particularly like education, and B, were probably naughty boys and girls. So it investigated, this group, NCRI, investigated the psychological effects of DEI pedagogy. And particularly it drew heavily from texts like How to Be an Anti-Racist and White Fragility. Now, this is by Ibram X. Kendi, who's a totalitarian lunatic, and Robin DiAngelo, who's this wibbling sort of middle-class HR manager that goes around the country charging 15 grand for a 5-minute fart. If you've seen Matt Walsh's Am I Racist, you'll know exactly who I'm talking about, because she just makes a complete fool of herself on camera for everybody to enjoy, and gets paid 15 grand for doing it, by the way. So there's the first thing. The second thing, right, the findings were unsettling, says Colin, though perhaps not surprising to long-standing opponents of such programs. Hey, Barry, what? Are you a long-standing opponent? Yeah. Using carefully controlled experiments, researchers found that exposure to anti-oppressive rhetoric, in other words, exposure to grievance mining by, people like gender-addled grievance gerbils and their ilk, it consistently amplified perceptions of bias where none existed. Well, gosh. I am Jack's surprised. I am Jack's surprised face, right? Hard left, totalitarian, authoritarian, identitarian, indoctrination sessions like Mao would be proud of, right? Make people find bias where there isn't any. So I'm so surprised. I'm just so surprised. Aren't you surprised, ladies and germs, that when we go after people and say everything's about power and oppression, that they start finding it? Gosh, it's almost like we know how cults work, isn't it? Which is what this is. In one experiment, participants read experts from Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi, juxtaposed against a neutral control text about corn production. Afterwards, they were asked to evaluate a hypothetical scenario, an applicant being rejected from an elite university, right? So here's the experiment, right? Those exposed to the DEI materials were far more likely to perceive racism in the admission process, despite no evidence to support such a conclusion. So they're seeing racism. Let's get the picture up here a bit more. There we are. Look, you can see they're seeing racism where it doesn't exist. Okay? And they've asked questions like this. It's just great. How many microaggressions did the applicant experience? How much harm did the applicant experience? How violent was the interviewer? What kind of jobs are they going for? Just that shows you how utterly insane these people are. Right there. Right there. Colin continues. Those exposed to the DEI materials were also more likely to advocate punitive measures, such as suspending the admissions officer or mandating additional DEI training. Now, this is interesting because you see, you may have watched it. I'll put it on the end of here. I'm not on the end literally, but you'll see the video. I did a video about Robbie Starbuck and about what happened at Walmart. Yep. Because when you look at that kind of stuff, what happens is these people get power from this. Like in Jaguar, where Jaguar, which is normally sort of, half-naked women lying on smart-looking cars that barely anybody can afford, right, have now gone down the woke route. And the guys come out and said the bloke that runs Jaguar is this sort of fey, quite weak-looking chap who was awarded some LGBT award that went to his head. I presume it's his head. Might be the other end. Right? He said that they're going to start dealing with people who've reacted badly to their new, gender fluid queer advert. In other words, they're going to bring in punitive measures for staff that don't agree with the woke nonsense they're doing. So the minute you give these people an inch, they will use it to be authoritarian and totalitarian. They will use it to destroy the lives of those who don't agree with their ridiculous cult-like beliefs. See? Interesting, isn't it? There's lots more. The NCRI, if you remember, that's who did the research, also analysed anti-Islamophobia training materials to determine their effectiveness in reducing anti-Muslim prejudice and to examine whether they unintentionally skewed perceptions of fairness, potentially reinforcing biases against institutions' views as oppressor. Following exposure to the text, two individuals, Ahmed Akhtar and George Green, both convicted of identical terrorism charges for bombing a local government building. In the control group, Ahmed's trial was perceived as just as fair as George's, indicating no baseline perception of Islamophobia. So, in other words, the control group went, yep, that was a fair trial for both. In the anti-Islamophobia content group, who'd had the treatment, the EDI treatment, who'd had the cult indoctrination, George's trial ratings were not significantly different from the content group, the control group, right? However, these ones. However, participants in the anti-Islamophobia treatment group rated Ahmed's trial as significantly less fair than did those in the control group. The training led them to perceive injustice towards Ahmed, despite the specifics of his situation being identical to those of George. This is just incredible. In other words, by carrying out these hard left indoctrinating ideas of power and oppression and intersectionality, that's their favourite one, isn't it? And critical race theory and queer theory and gender identity, all that hard left stuff, by carrying it out, what you end up doing is treating different groups based on your intersectionality differently. In other words, you increase bias. You don't end it. You didn't have to tell me this. I knew this. I saw it in action. I saw it in action at the universities I was working at. Absolutely saw it in action. But Colin lays it out so beautifully, and I think that you'll find it really interesting, even if you're not sort of like generally against this stuff. But you should have a look, okay? Because I think it needs to be out, and I think most of the people that are pushing it need to go to the funny farm. Off your pop, be like American Horror Story, wouldn't it? Or sat there, or Jessica Lange walks around and they sit listening to the singing nun, and then all gaga. Call it the DEI internment camp. Oh, I'm a naughty man. Go and read the whole damn thing. It's utterly fascinating. And I'll see you later, all right? Have a grand day, everyone. Bye-bye.